From the front door of the tin can to the duck pond is about 5 decades of the Rosary. And as I wandered to the duck pond today, I was pondering the works of two writers that were very important to me at different points in my life. The first was Teilhard de Chardin, whom I met in high school when I was a teenager. The second was Seraphim whom I met in Eureka Springs when I was in my 50s. My Latin teacher introduced me and her other students to Teilhard de Chardin. I think I'll just call him T to C after this. She introduced us to a lot of things besides Latin. And at that time in my young life, the idea that somehow a Christian, even if he was a Catholic Christian, could somehow understand evolution in a way that was acceptable to the faith. I mean, at that time I had a King James Bible that had dates in the margins, and it showed that the creation had happened in 4004 BC. And the vision, shall we say, of T to C, that all things were working together for the good of the kingdom of God, that eventually all things would be put under Christ's feet, even if we didn't see them there now, was very important. And I have returned to his writings from time to time over the years. I found the writings of Seraphim, as I mentioned, when I was in my 50s and living in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And there was a wonderful thing there called Operation Pass Along at Hillspeak. And there was a big volume of about his life and writings. And by that time in my life, looking around, I could sort of see that what once passed for Western civilization had pretty well fallen into a shambles. I was living a sort of liminal life myself, sort of a semi-hermit on the edge of town, no longer involved in parish ministry, but I had a little chapel called Our Lady of the Life-Giving Springs. And Rose's vision that it was necessary to flee from the insanities of what passes for civilization was very attractive to me. And his emphasis on the preservation of the true faith and orthodoxy was also very influential on me, although at that time I was probably at my most, in one sense, kumbaya attitude towards ecumenism. I was teaching classes at an Episcopal church and a Methodist church, and celebrating the great feast for just whoever showed up at my little chapel. Perhaps ironically, it was somewhat Seraphim Rose's attitude towards anyone who was not canonically orthodox, as he defined canonical, and the widespread sharing of that attitude among many other Orthodox Christians that prevented me from fully embracing Eastern Orthodoxy. But Rose also led me to explore the writings of many of the Orthodox saints and scholars. And it also happened that at that time, the Western Orthodox Church published what I call the BCP 2009, the Lancelot Andrewes Book of Common Prayer, which sort of brought together a lot of the strains of the history of my own practices over the years. These days, of course, my Latin teacher, and in fact my high school as I knew it, are long gone memories, as is the He'll Speak Pass-Along program that I enjoyed so much when I was living in Eureka Springs. And I suppose the closest thing to a replacement for them, for better or for worse, is the internet. And so yesterday when I saw a video pop up in which Orthodox Herman kind of fellow was quoting Seraphim Rose and Rose's condemnation of T to C, I listened to a large chunk of it and thought, I think perhaps I will reread a bit of Teilhard de Chardin. And I just happened to have at hand a copy of his third work, published in English, The Divine Milieu, and I kind of skimmed through it again. And I was not so impressed this go around by perhaps his reasoning as I had been when I was in high school. He starts off with a syllogism in which the members, he says, need no proof. And, well, although I might agree with the members of a syllogism, I think it's a kind of a weak argument to start with statements that you claim are more or less self-evident. And I'm not going to go deep into that here, but what I find sort of most significant and most interesting about his work this go around is that his big sort of borrowing from evolution is that phylogeny repeats ontogeny. That is, the life and development of the individual repeats the life and development of the species. And for Teilhard de Chardin, the individual Christian's life and development repeats and ultimately becomes the life of Christ. Not, of course, unlike what Athanasius had said many years ago, and very similar to the theosis that is pretty well central to the understanding, the basis of Orthodox spirituality or practice. For Teilhard de Chardin, the Lord is working his purpose out as age rolls on to age, and ultimately all things will be united to Christ. And of course in this he doesn't entirely disagree with Paul, does he, who talks about all things being subjected to Christ eventually. In many ways, Teilhard de Chardin is a kind of a universalist. He has this marvelous image of there being this omega point. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says Christ in the Revelation of St. John. And of course this use of a teleology, of an endpoint, put him at odds with a lot of current scientists, and his idea of evolution, his acceptance of his own kind of special idea of evolution, kind of like Einstein's special relativity or something, put him at odds with a lot of other Christians, one of whom is Seraphim Rose, who arguably is just as well educated, perhaps better educated than Teilhard de Chardin, and had a somewhat different understanding of the end point, I think. The end point for Seraphim Rose is what I guess is called the general judgment, and a lot of us will be thrown into the unbending fires of the second death. And if we're going to avoid those fires, we need to withdraw from the world, the flesh, and the devil. And of course, Rose withdrew pretty far from the world, leaving the flesh pots of San Francisco for the woods and hills of Platina. I sometimes wonder if this had to do with his own particular demons and how he found them difficult to overcome. And it is, I think, a fascinating thing that both Teilhard de Chardin and Rose pretty well fled the world. Rose to a hut in the wilds of Northern California, T to tents in the wilds of Asia. Rose would look for God in the interior life and the traditional practices of Orthodox asceticism, and T would look for God in the remnants of the past that he dug up throughout Asia. I'm a little leery of some of T.'s conclusions, because he said everywhere he looked, he found what he was expecting. Now, maybe I'm not understanding that quote in proper context, but when I find just what I'm looking for, well, I wonder if maybe just what I'm looking for is what I really need to find, but I could be wrong. But both of them would conclude that God was indeed findable. In fact, not only findable, but looking for us first in what Teilhard de Chardin calls the inner life. You have to make a hole in yourself that allows room for God. Teilhard de Chardin, I don't think, quite agreed with Augustine that hole was already there. It is in both Teilhard de Chardin's case and in Rose's case that there was a big emphasis on kenosis, and they would both empty themselves in order to make room for God. In fact, one of the more interesting bits, I think, of Teilhard de Chardin's writing is when he speaks of death as the necessary disassembly of our earthly body so that we can be reassembled in our future spiritual body. There is a sense in which both Teilhard de Chardin and Rose are prophets of the future. One of Rose's more famous books is Nihilism, the religion of the future, in which he pretty well predicted that our age would kind of fall into nihilism and despair, and it pretty well has. We have pretty well lost any concept of an objective reality, and this pretty well makes Rose a true prophet. I mean, if what a prophet predicts comes true, doesn't that make them a true prophet? There are those hopeful folks who suggest that we are on the other side of that now, and that we're past Rose's rather dismal view of the future, and that there is a sort of Orthodox and or Catholic resurgence with a more traditional understanding of the world. I'll wait and see. I hope that's true. And of course, Teilhard de Chardin's prophecy to be true. Well, won't happen in my lifetime, will it? His prophecy deals not with lifetimes so much as it does with ages. And yet I think both of these men are perhaps more similar than they are different, despite the efforts of those who want to make one a saint and the other a miscreant in some way or another. I mean, there are many folks who accuse Rose of being much too ascetic and extreme. And yet both of them are, I would argue, extreme. I mean, both of them went out far from the comforts of the world to seek God in the ways that they thought they would find him. And although Rose, I don't think, said, "Oh, I was exactly right in finding God where I thought I would. Well, he did, based on the previous teaching of Orthodox ascetics, have expectations which seem to have been fulfilled. Now, one of the things that Teilhard de Chardin says that I think is pertinent here perhaps is that it's not that important what we do. Our individual actions are not things that are needed by God, but that God is pleased by our attempts to please Him and to find Him and to love Him, however humble and confused they might be. And both Teilhard de Chardin and Seraphim Rose certainly sought to find God, to make room for God in their lives, and also to share how others might find God in their lives as well. Now, I am titling this video Teilhard de Chardin, Seraphim Rose, and the Rosary, and so I want to get to the Rosary more or less here. And that brings me back to the idea that somehow philology represents ontogeny. Teilhard de Chardin is quite explicit about this, but I think that Seraphim Rose is quite implicit about it. The idea that if we live as Christ tells us to live, we will become like Christ. And I find that a very convenient and easily available way to experience that sort of ontogeny becoming, phylogeny, is in the prayer of the Rosary, in which we are encouraged to repeat the events of the life of Christ as seen through the eyes of his mother, through the eyes of the one who gave birth to his flesh, and therefore, by extension, who gave birth to the body of Christ, his church. Mary being the one who, as Jesus will say, is my brother, is my mother, who hears my words and accepts them. In the Rosary, we have the opportunity to compare events in our life with the life of Christ as they are seen through the life of Mary, his mother, who very literally made room in her body, in her very womb, for God the Son. This is a mystery. We're talking about the mystery of the roses. This is an amazingly powerful sort of image that we often kind of skip over. And I find it very helpful again and again to slow down a bit, to look for instance, today being Sunday, Joyful Mysteries, the Annunciation. What am I hearing? What in my life am I hearing that is good news? And then, of course, after I hear it, what do I do with it? Mary doesn't just, go back into her room and say, oh, wow, happy me. I mean, she runs to tell her cousin Elizabeth. And then when the child is born that she has been promised, she doesn't just take him home and hide him. She presents him in the temple. She recognizes that this magnificent gift that has been given to her is not only for her, as painful as it will be, and she will hear about the pain at that time when she goes to the temple and hears the words of Simeon that a sword will pierce your heart too. Well, swords pierce the heart of Mary, and also, I suspect, of Teilhard de Chardin and of Seraphim Rose. And if we expect to become a member of Christ, then we are, of course, also ourselves going to have to accept a certain amount of suffering, because it was through suffering that Jesus overcame death. But we don't have to flee to the wilds of the California mountains or the deserts of China to seek God. We have the opportunity to do that in places that are much closer, in times that are ever present. And for that, I think we should give thanks. But to end this video with a part of Psalm 104, because it's one of my favorites, and because I think it fits the beauty of the Duckpond. You make springs gush forth in the valleys, they flow in between the hills, they give drink to all the beasts of the field. The wild asses quench their thirst. There the birds of the heavens build their nests. From the branches they sing their songs. From your dwellings you water the mountains. From your works the earth has its fill. You make the grass grow for the cattle and plants to serve mankind's needs, that he may bring forth bread from the earth and wine to cheer the heart, oil to make faces glad, and bread to strengthen the heart of man. The trees of the Lord drink their fill. The cedars he planted on Lebanon, there the birds build their nest. On the treetop the stork has his home. For the goats, the lowly mountains. For the rabbits, the rocks are a refuge. How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Vast and wide is the span of the sea, with its creeping things past counting, living things great and small. The ships are moving there, and the Leviathan you made to play with. All of these look to you to give them their food in due season. You give it, they gather it up. You open wide your hand, they are well filled. You hide their face, they are dismayed. You take away their breath, they die. Returning to the dust from which they came, you send forth your spirit, and they are created, and renew the face of the earth. May the glory of the Lord last forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He looks on the earth, and it trembles. He touches the mountains, and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord all my life, sing psalms to my God while I live. May my thoughts be pleasing to him. I will rejoice in the Lord.